Over the past few years, it has become a common trend for YouTube gamers of loyal fan bases to cover retrospectives of considered classic games, specifically focusing on very genre-defining titles and how they shaped their respective eras. And lately, I've been listening and taking in what a lot of these retrospectives have to say, because they actually managed to hit home a lot of points from what these games did right to the flaws that came about as they aged over time. Today, I'd like to contribute my own retrospective with two classic games that really made an impact on my younger self, and what I believe helped make me what kind of gamer and person that I am today. And these games are Nintendo's flagship jumps to the third dimension, Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Now I guess I can consider myself quite lucky that these are my very first video games that I picked up and played as a child. My father owned a Nintendo 64 because he himself was a fan of the Mario franchise, and with that console came a bundle of other games that he bought along the way. So it became quite tradition for me to watch his playthroughs as a kid. And when I was old enough, I finally got around to playing the first game that I wanted to play by choice. And as a child, my mind was set to Super Mario 64. Which was probably the most logical choice. All the colors and the playfulness of seeing the game this whole time really drew me in to wanting to play and control Mario for my own, which really fit my childhood self. A kid that just wanted to run and jump around, exploring the world, because it literally felt like a sandbox that I could play in. You had the freedom to run around, in and out of worlds in a hub that was easy to comprehend. And the game didn't require too much of a grind to complete, only requiring 70 of the 120 Power Star missions, giving the player even more freedom to play the game as they please. Quite an incredible feat on Nintendo's part, since this was their very first game that they made fully into 3D. It took 3 years for them to develop this, 1 year to create the concept, and 2 years to develop the game. Also a challenge because they had to create their first 3D game on a new platform with everything else considered. And what they came up with was such a childhood-defining romp, full of flavor and charisma. Memorable landscapes with the right amount of challenges. And I did say childhood-defining, because it really appeases to the childlike nature that the Mario series provides. I'm not saying that Mario is just a game for kids, but I really appreciate that the Mario series can cater to all gamer types, especially kids. Which for me makes Mario a great starting point to be a gamer. When we look back at the original Mario Brothers, the game was designed with the player's fresh experiences at that time in mind. Starting out the game in a way that the player would understand the controls and what to do immediately, scrolling to the right, encouraged to jump, etc. They were able to then adapt this into their 3D platforming experience, a little more explicitly through text boxes and signs. But even then, starting the game in a new save file spawns Mario in a sandbox that a player can already explore before entering the main hub and progressing with the plot. This gives the player control over discovering the controls of the game on their own, running up and down ramps and swimming through water, while still holding true by making sense into the setting of the game. Mario is invited to Peach's castle, and of course the castle would have a field and a moat for someone to roam around in. Just a little mechanics to story cohesion that I appreciate from the game designers. Kind of gives it a Nintendo charm. After exploring the outside, you finally get to step into the castle. Not as big as you'd imagine from the outside, but the warning from Bowser, or the fact that this foyer has a lot of doors, would intrigue you to push forward. And this opening area is still pretty sandboxy. You can roam around platforming with the stairs and the second floor, and if you don't want to head into the doors yet, you can talk to the toad that would provide information on how the castle stars work. This actually helps if the player would get overwhelmed by the amount of paths to take, giving weight to the power stars needed as collectibles for the player to progress. ultimately giving the player a sense of progression and direction. All of this you can figure out with the first few minutes of playing the game. Let's say you're a new player playing for the first time. You could get acquainted with the controls, the story, and the setting probably in less than 5 minutes without too much hand-holding. I guess this is one of the reasons why Super Mario 64 stayed iconic through the years, because it was easy to pick up and get acquainted with, which is also what gives it that Mario charm. Other 3D Marios feature newer gimmicks and design elements that could intimidate the player upon seeing the gameplay. For example, added peripherals like FLUDD or Cappy. But with Super Mario 64, you're just Mario with all of his moves accessible from the start. And yes, there are power-ups like in typical Mario fashion, but they aren't the core mechanics of the game. Most of them serve as keys for getting certain stars. And that's where I appreciate the amount of freedom and choice when it comes to beating the game how you'd like. A new player doesn't know that the game has 120 stars. It is only explicitly stated on the Bowser doors the amount of stars needed to unlock them. Therefore, a player may only get through the game with 70 stars. Upon progressing through the game, we're shown that the game's 15 courses have 6 main star missions, which would equate to 90 total stars by playing by these rules. If we get lucky while exploring, we can discover on our own that collecting 100 coins in the courses gives us a bonus star for that course. Exploring the castle is even more rewarding, because there are still even more secret stars to be found to bring the total to 120. While the main objective is rewarding in itself, it is even more heightened when the player does what they want and finds something else in the process. This is also made clear by hidden coins and 1-ups throughout the game. And that for me is pretty important. Progress through freedom and self-discovery, giving the feeling of personal achievement. Of course, not all of that comes easy. Nintendo was still able to put difficulty and challenges into Super Mario 64. They were able to keep this through course progression. For example, the player starts off in Bob-omb Battlefield, which is a great first stage because once Mario spawns, the player can see almost the entire stage ahead. Once they roam around, they'll encounter some optional enemies along the way, and these enemies are the biggest threat in this stage so far. Once the player enters the next stages, they'll notice that now they have bottomless pits that they'll have to avoid. And then by the end of the game, the last 2 courses have barely any flooring to them. But by this point, the player should already be used to these concepts in the 3D space. Which is why being a new player going through all of these stages and clearing them makes it feel like such an accomplishing journey. So what I'm trying to say here is that Super Mario 64 is a great title to pick up at any given time for anyone. As a child with fresh experiences to the video game world, this game would perfectly fit to the childlike curiosity, emulating freedom and intrigue, discovering mystical worlds from different locales and settings, cleverly tied together in a hub world through paintings. At the same time, experienced gamers would find that navigating and platforming through these levels could still provide quite a challenge to accomplish. And today it stood through the test of time as Nintendo gave it the necessary re-release on the Switch, letting newer players experience Mario's first 3D platformer for the first time, and letting experienced players relive their Mario journeys through the official re-releases. And this is what this game feels like. It feeds that childlike wonder and curiosity of being free, doing what you want, exploring wherever you'd like to go. The presentation is light and enticing, with worlds that are varied and intriguing, with Bowser being a worthy opponent to close off each subsection of the game. By the end of the game, the credits neatly wrap up, showing every place that Mario and the player has been in for their entire journey, which is a great feel-good ending to watch looking back at all of the places that you've been through as your story comes to a close. Now Ocarina of Time is another entity and another journey altogether. It's a Zelda game now. And what does that mean in its core, and what does it mean to grow up with it? Well, the first Zelda was created with the freedom of exploration of a big world in mind, which continued its trope through the other 2D entries, especially with the classic Link to the Past on the NES. And how did they manage to translate this into 3D? Did they even manage to translate it? Well, in my opinion, for the most part, yes. They did manage to capture how the world of Zelda really felt. They gave it the proper amount of mysticism and wonder in its environment, emotion, and atmosphere, especially with the sound design. At the same time, this game was really immersive. As a kid that was new to video games at that time, and having the world of Mario 64 to compare it with, this game overwhelmed me with the size of the map and the amount of places to explore. And I felt that as early as the first area of the game, Kokiri Forest. There was an entire community of kids to explore, other houses to enter, another section of the woods to literally get lost in, and also a giant tree dungeon needed to progress with the quest. And that was quite a big transition from the Mario genre that I got used to. The settings in both of these games are built around fictional worlds, but Ocarina feels a little closer to life, if you know what I mean. Like, yes, it's a fantastic world with fantasy elements, but much like the real world, you're just a little kid in a big world of people, races, and so many different places. Upon booting up Ocarina for the first time, you can immediately tell that it's going to be quite a serious adventure. The game opens up with an opening cutscene, with the first frames showing a location in the game that you'll only be able to access after beating the first dungeon. So of course, seeing it for the first time already gives you a sense of wonder on what this vast 3D expanse is, and if you'll get to experience it on your own. And then you see a character riding his horse through the field, which makes the player realize that you may be getting a horse of your own as well. And then the title logo comes up. And that's when you realize that this game is bigger than what you imagined. I'm not sure if it was just me, but I felt the vastness of this game through this opening cutscene, just letting it play, taking in the scenes with the opening music. Whatever field was shown here, it certainly was not as playful as Bob-omb Battlefield anymore. In Ocarina of Time, your quest is huge. It isn't just to save a princess anymore, it adds to that. You have to save the princess, and at the same time save the entire world in the process. Because story-wise, you possess something that only Zelda and the ultimate enemy, Ganondorf, has. And that something is what Ganondorf uses to lead the world into ruin. As you go throughout the game, you feel the weight of Ganondorf's effects in the world, as you see it happening around you and the people you interact with. This is where Ocarina of Time's story really gets you, on how real the threat of Ganondorf is in your quest. There's not a lot of time to waste going around being a kid that much. Even if you can, there's still the pressure on you that you feel, especially with your own partner nagging you every time. There's a lot of responsibility on you being the hero of the story. And much like growing up, you need to carry these responsibilities with you as you go through your journey. As a kid that didn't really want to feel all of that, even implicitly, I really chose the comfort of Mario's little castle over the vast kingdom of Hyrule. The concept of Zelda's different theme and playstyle was something I wasn't used to. I guess this was kind of my mistake when I was playing Ocarina of Time, especially as a young kid. Coming fresh off Mario 64 when I started playing this game, I was immediately shocked by the different control scheme. It was a 3D game, but it didn't feel as free as how Mario's controls did. In fact, I remember getting so frustrated over the fact that I couldn't jump. It felt like everything was literally so grounded, and I had to adjust to whatever the action button told me to do at the time. The only thing similar with the control scheme was the B button to attack. And no, this isn't a complaint on Ocarina's control scheme, it was just my naive childhood preference that longed for what I was used to. When I had enough time to understand the gameplay, the controls of Ocarina weren't that much of a challenge to get used to. In a way, both control schemes became each series' staple mechanics in their 3D titles moving forward, which goes to show that these initial 3D games did something right with their controls. This made me realize that Nintendo did learn from both of these franchises. They were the ideal ways for the controls to accommodate the player according to the gameplay styles and themes, and they updated these controls moving forward. 10 years later, we finally got Link to jump in Skyward Sword. A lot of the reasons why Ocarina of Time felt like such a pressuring journey was the focus on the story. Take for example the locations on both games. Mario and Zelda share places of similar themes, although Zelda doubles down on this world building and backstory setting. Every location in the game makes sense on how they're connected to each other, especially how your actions affect the world at large as you progress through the game. This is where I talk about the uniqueness of Ocarina of Time's story. The main focus of this game is the 7-year time jump from young Link to adult Link using the Ocarina of Time, as instructed by Zelda when you're a child. Only once you defeat the 3 Child Link dungeons will you gain access to this time jump, in a way proving your worth to enter adulthood. Once you take the time jump to the future, you'll see that just like in real life, a lot has happened to the world. Once you step out of the Temple of Time, you'll notice that Death Mountain, a place that you've visited before, is now burning with a bright red fire, and the sky has suddenly turned dark. Some things that you may think are off, but not a reason to panic by any means. But then when you step into Castletown Market and the entire place is burnt to ash and full of these screaming zombies you've probably never encountered before, now that is something to be scared of. Once you step into the place that was Hyrule Castle is when you realize that Ganondorf has really taken over. Hyrule has gone to ruin after being away all this time, and now, somehow, you're gonna have to stop this. And this, in my opinion, is where your journey really starts. I have to admit, during my first playthrough as a kid, I was forever stuck as Child Link because my mindset was stuck on the sandbox perspective. I focused more on exploring the world than focusing on the story. I probably spent so many playthroughs just hearing Navi telling me to talk to Saria, and me, who didn't pay attention to the story, didn't even know where the heck Saria was, and how to even get to her. And I'm fully aware that a lot of people would be disappointed in me because that point in the game is only a few events after the first dungeon. But then I wouldn't say I regretted it. I feel like I got to explore so much of Hyrule as a kid. Granted, I didn't have bombs at that point, which kind of blocks off an entire area. I managed to do a lot of kid side quests, like finding collectibles, heart pieces, and Skulltulas. I was literally a kid experiencing the kid section of the game. Of course I knew that Link had to grow up somehow, I just didn't know how yet. But watching the cutscene of him riding Epona made me really wish that he grew up already. And I was in for quite a ride when I finally figured out what to do, because Hyrule really scared me in more ways than one after the time skip when I unlocked it for the first time. I felt the change in each location because I got so used to it as a child. Hyrule Castle is now Ganon's castle, floating over a lava moat. The playful residents of Castletown have moved to Kakariko Village. Goron City is now empty, and now your hometown Kokiri Forest is overrun by monsters. At the same time, I had to progress through bigger and scarier dungeons that I didn't even know were in these locations before. Most notably the bottom of the well. Yes, I have to admit this place still haunts me until today. This entire room's floor and ceiling is covered in skulls, while I have to fight whatever this is. I really had to power through all of these because as a kid, a lot of these things are just left to your imagination. It really did awaken some of those childhood fears. So this is kind of where the differences of these two games were clear to me. There were some scary elements in Mario 64 for sure, but with Ocarina of Time, there's a possibility of danger and fear in any place that you go. It was another kind of thrill that a kid that wasn't used to horror had to go through. And yes, in time, I did grow up and realize how ridiculous I was by being scared of all of this, but at the same time I can't blame myself for how I took it. I guess what kind of matters is that I got through it. After a lot more exploring, cowering, and conquering, I was able to beat the game eventually, while taking a lot of breaks to play other friendlier games in between. In the end, I can't deny that playing Ocarina of Time was quite an amazing experience. Of course, I'm summarizing a 30-hour playthrough into just a few paragraphs, but trust me, there's actually a lot that the game offers. And it instilled something very unique in me. It represented how it felt like to grow up in the real world. Yes, as a kid, I enjoyed having my freedom, running around everywhere, but I needed to realize that eventually I had to grow out of it. Even if there were times that I wished I grew up already, I also had to realize that growing up would be far more challenging than the comforting world of being a kid made me feel. I had to be careful of what I wished for, because growing up is seriously a lot more complex, scarier, and challenging for someone with an immature mindset to face. This is where Ocarina of Time excels. It makes you realize that yes, growing up is pressuring, but you'll still grow along the way. Getting you into places that you've never been to before, and talking to new people and making new relationships. Upgrading a lot of things that you have to help you in your journey. You may not have to save the world, you just have to live in it. And that already is challenging. But it works out when you grow and learn to be better equipped for your journey ahead. And that is something that I haven't felt while I was playing Super Mario 64. Super Mario 64 in many ways was a starting point for me when it came to gaming and when it came to my childhood. And as I got older, I also learned to love Ocarina of Time, no matter how intimidating or overwhelming it got. It made this game even more fulfilling to get through. And it felt like such a big achievement when I finally beat it. And that is a feeling that only a long and winding journey can give. And those have been my experiences growing up with both of these games.